When I began this 72-hour prayer experiment without sleep, I thought I understood what exhaustion felt like. I thought I knew the limits of my mind, the strength of my spirit, and the threshold of what a human heart can endure. But by the end of the first night, I realized I had no idea what I had stepped into. Sleep deprivation, ISNT, just tiredness. It's the slow dissolving of the boundary between the physical and the spiritual. The first hours were simple enough. Quiet prayer, reading scripture, pacing back and forth in a dimly lit room to keep myself awake. But as the hours passed, the silence around me grew heavier. The shadows in the corners of the room felt thicker, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Around the 12-hour mark, my thoughts began to stretch and pull like threads coming loose from fabric. My mind didn't wander, it drifted, slipping into memories, fears, conversations I'd forgotten, and prayers I had never finished. And it became painfully clear that without the noise of life, without sleep, without distraction, my soul had nowhere to hide from itself. Every insecurity I had ever buried rose like smoke in the room. Every regret replayed in perfect clarity. Tears came without the usual resistance, almost involuntarily, not because I was sad, but because something in me was unraveling. And yet, there was a strange and undeniable peace beneath the unraveling, a sense that I was being stripped down layer by layer, not to be broken, but to be rebuilt. Around hour 20, my body begged me to lie down, but I pressed on, whispering prayers that felt less like words and more like groans from deep inside my chest. It was then, in that fragile moment between strength and collapse, that I felt something shift, not around me but inside me, as if God himself had leaned closer and whispered, "Keep going, I'm here." By the time hour 30 arrived, my eyes burned and my thoughts floated like fog drifting through a forgotten room. My vision pulsed with a soft blur, and every blink felt like falling into a dream I wasn't allowed to enter. The room I had spent almost a full day in began to feel foreign, bigger than before, as if I were shrinking inside my own body. My hearing became unusually sharp. Soft sounds felt amplified, almost spiritual. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs sounded like a distant choir. My heartbeat thumped like a drum, echoing inside a cavern. But the strangest thing happened around hour 36. As I knelt on the floor, whispering the same prayer again and again just to keep my mind from slipping too far, I saw something. Not with my eyes, but with whatever part of a person perceives the spiritual world. Shapes, faint and drifting, moved at the edges of my vision. Not dark or threatening, but soft, almost like silhouettes, illuminated behind a veil. At first, I thought it was hallucination, the natural breakdown of a sleep-deprived mind. But then one of these shapes paused, pressed into the corner of my awareness, and I felt something, a presence, not a figure, not an entity, a presence. Something holy, something gentle, something watching. My breath caught in my throat. Tears blurred my vision. I wasn't afraid. I felt understood, and then an overwhelming impression spread across my spirit, clear as spoken words. You are not losing your mind. You are losing what was never meant to stay. A sob tore out of me, deeper than anything I had felt in years, because I knew exactly what it meant. I wasn't just tired, I was being emptied. Emptied of fear, of expectations, of noise, of the chains I didn't realize I had dragged into this experiment. I had thought these 72 hours would test my strength. Instead, they exposed my weakness and made room for God to fill the space. Hour 48 was where everything changed. My body was shaking from exhaustion, my hands trembling each time I lifted them in prayer. But inside me, a strange clarity emerged. It is difficult to explain unless you've even awake long enough to watch your thoughts separate from your instincts. My mind wasn't foggy anymore, it was sharp, painfully sharp. I saw my life with a clarity that felt unnatural, as if God had pulled me outside myself to observe my own heart. I saw why certain doors closed. I saw where I had ignored warnings. I saw blessings I had walked past because I was too distracted to recognize them. And most painfully, I saw the moments I had begged God to move, not realizing He already had. I just wasn't still enough to notice. Around hour 55, something else happened. A warmth entered the room, subtle at first, like the air itself had shifted. My chest loosened, my breathing steadied, my hands stopped shaking. The exhaustion was still there, but something stronger overshadowed it. Presence, a real presence. For the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they say God's presence fills a room. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't psychological. It was unmistakable. A weight, a warmth, a holiness that pressed gently against my skin. And within that presence, I sensed something like a message forming, not in words, but in understanding. Your spirit was designed for more than comfort. You grow where you are broken open. It was then that I realized the visions, the unraveling, the clarity, the presence, none of it was random. The exhaustion had peeled back layers of my mind, the way fire reveals what gold really is. I wasn't just awake, I was awake spiritually in a way I had never been before. The final 12 hours felt like walking on the thin line between heaven and collapse. My body was done, muscles twitching, eyes stinging, thoughts flickering like candlelight in a storm. but my spirit was soaring in a way I could never describe with human language. Near hour 66, something extraordinary happened. As I was praying, barely able to keep my head lifted, I felt a burst of clarity inside my mind so strong, I gasped. A vision, brief but vivid, flashed across my spirit like lightning. I saw myself laying down burdens I didn't know I was still holding. I saw chains falling, not from my hands, but from my thoughts. I saw my future, not the details, but the direction, with an assurance I had never felt before. And then came the final message, one that landed in my spirit with the weight of truth that would stay with me forever. You, Dan T, need sleep to dream. You need surrender. In that moment, everything inside me broke wide open. Not in pain, but in revelation. I realized that this entire experiment had been less about endurance and more about exposure, exposing the clutter of my spirit, exposing the distractions of my life, exposing the noise that had drowned God's whisper for years. When the 72nd hour finally ended and I lay down to rest, I didn't feel victorious. I felt reborn. Not because I made it without sleep, but because God had taken those 3 days and carved something new inside me. I understood then that sometimes God has to strip us of comfort to show us what we were capable of hearing, seeing, and becoming. And as I finally closed my eyes, letting sleep take me, one quiet truth settled in my spirit: surrender will take you places strength never will.